While every action and decision has consequences for the universe and its hundreds of thousands of players, the game remains very much about your unique adventure and story.
In case it wasn't obvious, we at TheGamer absolutely love open-world RPGs. From the OG Zelda to Skyrim and beyond, if there's an open-ended game with a vast world to explore, chances are we've put an embarrassing amount of time into it. With the next console generation on the horizon, open-world games might be getting a little too big. Like, quit your day job just so you have enough time to complete the main campaign big. Thankfully, innovation in both gaming hardware and game design should make getting through Elder Scrolls 6 and GTA 6 much more manageable. Let's break it down, shall we? Next-gen hardware and you. As much as we hate to admit it, a lot of the time that gamers put into open-world games is due to hardware limitations. We've all been there. You're out fighting some Mirelurks for a quest in Fallout 4, you get the MacGuffin or defeat whatever number of enemies you need to, and then fast travel back to a settlement to turn that quest in. And then you wait for a minute or two for the game to load in the new area. Maybe you check your phone, maybe you run to the bathroom, but after a bit, you get your reward. After that, you pull up the menu to fast travel for a different mission and end up waiting for the game to load again. In the moment, this isn't too big of an inconvenience, but it adds up over the course of dozens of hours. If you put 100 hours into a game like Final Fantasy XV, it's not unreasonable that anywhere between 5 to 10 of those hours went to load times. Especially if you died as many times as we did in the secret dungeon when the game suddenly becomes a platformer. Ugh. Thankfully, gaming companies are aware of this shortcoming, and the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are set to directly address this issue. Both consoles are going to have way more power under the hood than the current gen. Both will be able to run games at 120 frames per second and will be able to display 8K graphics. You'll have to spend about $3.5 grand to buy an 8K TV to utilize that feature, but you do you, and live your best life, alright? Your best life also definitely involves subscribing to TheGamer. It really helps us out and ensures that you'll check out some great gaming videos in the future. The inclusion of solid-state drives is what's mainly going to cut down on those pesky load times, though. Solid-state drives have virtually no latency when it comes to accessing and loading files. This means that locations, enemies, and all kinds of other data can be accessed and rendered much more quickly than systems that use a hard disk drive. For example, when Sony showed off a port of the Spider-Man PS4 game running on the PlayStation 5, load times were almost non-existent. Scenes that took upwards of 15 seconds to load on the PS4 were rendered in a fraction of a second on the PS5. That's incredibly impressive, even if the Spider-Man game was optimized for a much less powerful system. This improvement promises that players will spend less time waiting for their games to load up and more time actually playing them. However, solid-state drives do come with a couple of downsides, as will the games optimized for next-gen systems. The way that solid-state drives store data means that it can't be expanded with an external hard drive. Theoretically, data could be stored on an external solid-state drive, but those don't really exist on a mass market level, yet. Even with expanded storage space, the growing size of AAA games means that players will likely only be able to have 10 games on a system at a time, or possibly even less if someone's buying digital versions of games. This means that players might have to regularly delete games to make room for new ones on the PS5 and Series X, which is something we already do on current-gen consoles every time we get a new game. Fans of the now unavailable Scott Pilgrim game will know that gaming companies aren't the best when it comes to preserving their games either. So we may see stories crop up of people buying a game, deleting it to make room for another game, and then discovering that they can't play it anymore. That's really not great for consumers, and essentially means that gamers are renting digital games instead of actually owning them. That's right, just like how this gen was defined by loot boxes and microtransactions, there are sure to be plenty of scams in next-gen gaming too. That's pretty pessimistic thinking that hopefully won't come to fruition. It's obvious though that games are about to get a whole lot bigger and faster on next-gen systems. The increased RAM on both systems also practically guarantees that they'll look and play better too. In fact, let's take a look at the games we're most excited about and how this tech could help them improve. Opening up open-world games. The open-world genre of games is one of the oldest in the medium, with the original The Legend of Zelda more or less inventing the concept. Open-world games are also usually used to measure hardware advancements in the gaming industry. By comparing the original Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild, it's easy to see how much gaming has grown in the course of 30 years. The first Zelda is a top-down experience that throws players into a world of secrets and allows them to explore at their own pace. Ocarina of Time is similar, but in 3D with far more robust combat mechanics. Breath of the Wild pushes the graphics even further and is loaded with a number of systems so that all objects interact with each other in unique ways. This progression alone shows how open-world games aren't just getting bigger, they're also growing denser. From NPCs with unique schedules to player actions resonating throughout the world, open-world RPGs are becoming rich with detail. And this next-gen hardware is only going to help make them even richer. Take, for instance, the next Rockstar game, likely Grand Theft Auto 6 or Red Dead Redemption 3. Who are we kidding? We won't see Red Dead for another 20 years. Oh, Arthur. Speaking of Red Dead 2, that game was a masterpiece and one of the most detailed games in existence. Every animation is so painstakingly crafted and intricate that it's hard to believe such a work could exist on current hardware. The next generation of gaming hardware can improve upon this masterpiece in a number of ways. Solid-state drives can preload locations and animations, making transitions between scenes and events smoother. The increased RAM can also prevent games from dropping frames during more intense moments. Frame drops are inevitable as games push the limits of hardware. But the difference between 120 frames per second and 60 is harder to notice than current discrepancies. The improved graphics cards on the PlayStation 5 and Series X will also allow Rockstar worlds to be rendered in even more detail. Now, instead of horse testicles changing size depending on the weather, we'll be able to count every individual hair on them there balls. Actually, that's probably one upgrade we could do without. Technology doesn't need to go that far. So long as Rockstar continues filling their games with new and intricate systems, they're set to grow exponentially better. A giant world to explore doesn't mean much if there isn't anything to do in it. However, these new consoles are poised to greatly benefit open-world adventure games. This new hardware will also improve other genres of games. Call of Duty and Battlefield, the biggest FPS titles, also stand to gain a lot. Loading into matches is set to be a breeze with this hardware, and input latency could become a thing of the past. Sure, people are always going to complain about lag and wonky hitboxes, but now their excuses will be even lamer. This tech will make Call of Duty an even more precise twitch reflex competitive shooter. Similarly, the scope of Battlefield games could grow even bigger. We're talking more vehicles, more players, bigger set pieces, and maybe, just maybe, people will be able to play as a woman without some players throwing a fit. That feat, however, falls more on the fanbase. With such advancements on the horizon, it's easy to see how gaming might become an even more intense hobby for people, not that it isn't already. EVE Online is such a massive and complex multiplayer game that it's practically a second job for some people. Well, unless you already quit your job to become a full-time EVE Online player. Now that the game has a fully functioning stock market, going full-time just seems like a good investment. EVE Online is a PC game, though, and may not be directly impacted by the next generation of consoles. A rising tide lifts all ships, though, so let's take a look at how the PS5 and Series X will benefit gaming across the board. Gaming in the 2020s. By now, you've probably noticed that we haven't talked much about VR in this video. Truthfully, that scene has stagnated a bit in the past few years. But the next console generation should shake things up. When Sony releases the PlayStation 5, they'll also release a new VR headset. While Nintendo does have the Labo, Sony by far has committed more VR than any other console maker in this past generation. Microsoft, though, doesn't have much in the way of VR lined up. However, they have acquired a lot of indie studios this past year, and may dedicate those resources to the platform in the years to come. PC gaming is also set to grow exponentially in the next decade, thanks to this upcoming console generation. The vast majority of games today are designed to be played on consoles, rather than high-end gaming PCs. While PCs can definitely upscale games, the sad truth is that most games aren't built to take advantage of PC specs. However, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are closer to gaming PCs than any console before. With the utilization of solid-state drives and more robust graphics cards, it'll be even easier to port console games to PC, and vice versa, so we're likely to see games start looking even better across the board. Unless you're a hardcore Nintendo Switch player. The portable system is going to have an even harder time keeping up in the graphics department next generation. Nintendo is off the standard console development cycle though, so it wouldn't be unexpected for them to unveil a more advanced Switch Pro in the next year or two. Or maybe Nintendo will release a dedicated home console and keep support for the Switch going as a companion system. After all, with Nintendo, anything could happen. Lastly, the next console will have some limitations. It's unlikely that the base PS5 or Series X will have 5G support. Their streaming and social media integration may also be fairly limited. Both Sony and Microsoft have made it clear by now that they'd rather have people communicate on their own networks than share experiences on third-party platforms. It'll also take a while for gamers to really start making the most out of the new system. Consoles aren't usually pushed to their limits until the end of their lifespan. There's a pretty good chance the next-gen titles might just look and play like slightly souped-up current-gen games for the first year or so. That being said, there's still definite progress happening, and we should be excited about that. By the end of this next console cycle, it's clear that the gaming landscape will look vastly different than it does today. With everything we know about the PS5 and Series X so far, that landscape will feature plenty of great games, and some particularly amazing open-world titles. What do you think the next generation of consoles is going to do to the future of gaming? Please let us know in the comments section down below. While you're there, remember to like this video, ring that bell, and subscribe to The Gamer for even more insights into the gaming industry.